And so, do I just start or do I?
Yeah.
Somebody can
Daryl,
introduce?
you want to ring the bell? What's your?
Aiden.
You want to ring the bell?
It's gonna be
Yeah. Wow.
I'm going forward.
That's impressive.
Yeah, get the little bell for that. Good morning. We're going to get started. This is Aiden. He's going to be our instructor for today on our diversity training. If you guys have not done so at break, make sure you fill out the roster, get your name on there, and so we can record you for getting credit. At this point, Aiden has stated we'll go until lunchtime, and then we'll have an afternoon session. And finish time will be depending on how interactive we are and when Aiden's done talking.
How many nodding off?
Nodding off. So, Jeff, anything else for class rules?
Well, you all are grown-ups. Use the bathroom when you need to. What's your usual? Do you like to take a little break? I mean, we're going to go from now until noon. Shall I pause and make sure we can do that? Or? Okay. Okay.
Yeah. It's like herding cats, so give
Yeah,
the
yeah.
timeline if you do a break. All right, is the lighting okay?
Sure.
Yeah.
And then also, I don't have the biggest booming voice. Troublemakers in the back. I heard that's where you all are. Yeah.
Yes.
You can hear me okay? Okay. Let me know if that changes or whatever. Yeah, so thanks for having me. I was excited to been talking about this since last summer. I met up with my nephew, who's a firefighter up in Anchorage, and I said, so what do I say to these folks? And he said, well, just be yourself. So I will do something totally unusual and be myself, except that's the only way I know how to do it. Oh my gosh, if you are insisting that I talk the whole time, we will end in a couple of hours. You know what? But this is not a boring conversation. So so feel free to dive in. It was interesting to be on my way here because I did a fair amount of work a few years ago in for the district, the school district. And so, that's your neighbor right here. I'm like, I know this road. I know where I am. And it was really powerful. I might chat about a few of those things that happened. I don't know if you all remember. This was probably in 2016. I heard about Snohomish and gender inclusive policy up for discussion with the school board. I heard about it on the news. And I thought, holy shit, good luck. I wonder who's there to help them with that. 3 minutes in and I'm already using profanity. Okay, all right.
Chief's not here. Who's writing the chief up for not being here?
Yeah. So, and the reason that I say that is because I think this conversation about gender diverse people, and especially young people, students in schools, is pretty new. I've been doing this work within schools and other entities, workplaces and things like that for over 20 years. But I'll tell you, not that whole time stepping into schools. And I absolutely remember the first school I stepped into that wanted training. And they said, well, we have a transgender student in our school. I think it was a third grader. And I said, I don't know how to do it either. But we stepped in and we started having conversations and they'd say, well, what about this? And I said, well, actually, that's not going to happen, but here's something you might need to consider. And in some respects, though, that first few times was a guessing game and a little bit of crossing fingers. Am I giving good advice or perspective or food for thought? And it turned out they gave me a lot of food for thought as well. That really ramped up when I got to come to the district here, because the intensity that was showing up in 2016 was, it was not a shortcut. There was no shortcut to move through it. And when I spoke with the leadership in the district, they said, you know what, we are a tight community. We have our all sorts of differences, but we solve our problems together. So how do we do it? And I said, well, I don't have a shortcut for you. So if you want to step in, it's having conversations, and it's having the opportunity to, you know, hear what's on your mind, and not just, oh, I have a question about statistics with respect to trans children and, you know, whatever. It's like, you know what, this feels, I don't know, it feels wrong in my gut. Why are we doing this? How are we doing this? Why do we think this is a reasonable conversation even about transgender people to have in our schools? I don't feel like we can really get anywhere unless we throw all that stuff on the table. So that's my kind of long-winded way of saying, I hope that you all will engage with me and say what's on your mind. Yeah. So let's see what else. Let me just back up and say hi. I'm Aiden, Aiden Key, and I wear two hats in my work world. One is for an organization called Gender Diversity, and that's when I have opportunities like this to step in with you all, and then also schools. I mentioned a lot of organizations and agencies that serve youth. So that's when people are really interested in the topic and really don't have, there's just not a lot of places to turn yet. The other hat is for an organization called Trans Families. It's the family support arm of our work. And I will be chatting with you about the journeys of families who have kids that are transgender, or they think they are transgender, or they don't know where their kids are going, or they're using some term or half a dozen terms that mean nothing to the average person. And how do they even know what to do? So I will chat a bit about that. The first part of our conversation, I'm just going to walk you through a few sort of conceptual elements, so that hopefully when I spend the rest of the time talking, you know what I'm talking about. I try not to use jargon. So if I do say something and you're like, I have no idea what you're saying, stop me and say, you know, back up, what are you talking about? Okay. Yeah. One other thing, because so much of my work is done in schools, and I've had the opportunity to step into classrooms with kindergartners, first graders, and on up. I will show you all, tell you all, share with you all some of those stories, because I believe that it helps us. I believe it helps us to dig in further. So, yeah. Any other sort of thoughts from you all before we get going, or questions about the day that you all have? I have. No. Big no. Okay. I will want you to engage with me, please. And if that means stop talking, I have something I want to say right now, you can do that anywhere along the way. I'm pretty sure you won't derail me. Yeah.
Hey, I know you talked to your nephew, you know, about talking to firefighters. Have you gone out and talked to any other fire departments before?
No.
Okay.
No. Yeah, I know. I'm impressed with Snohomish. I think it's pretty awesome. But I really do focus a lot on the work with schools, because my heart has really been drawn to that work. But, you know, have I ever worked with an actuarial firm? Well, yeah. and architects and, you know, also a jewelry company and some place called Yoga Buggy. You know, it's pretty fascinating to see where the inquiries show up. And so on that note, there's a consistency to at least some early questions. And so that's what I'm going to step into and walk us through to start. And on that note, there could be a discussion that we want to have that has nothing to do with your work world, but has to do with stuff that you might be seeing in the news. Or, you know, my neighbor, blah, 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 says this, or any number of things. Anybody know a transgender person? It's so, I used to ask that and maybe a hand would go up. Does anybody know what the term cisgender means? You don't have to answer. In North Dakota, they have zero idea. They have no idea. Yeah, what is it? Cisgender, I'm not going to even use that term throughout our conversation. But cisgender, if we think about the prefix trans and the prefix cis, that I believe both come from chemistry, which I did not ever take in high school. Trans means across, and cis means on the same side. So if your gender identity aligns with your body, your anatomical sex, that's cisgender. So that's most people. I usually say things like transgender and people who are not, because that seems to be a little clearer. All right. But, and you know, I'm going to have some things to share from my own perspective, and hopefully that will be reasonable to do. What is gender? I don't remember ever having anybody define the word gender for me from a young age. I do remember as a young person feeling a little kind of confused that the term sex was synonymous with gender. Like, okay, well, why two different words? And especially when sex also means an activity. So I remember pondering that, but I don't remember pondering it enough to feel like I needed to go find some clarity. It's just a little bit of a curiosity. So I think it's okay to say, what is gender? And if I were to step into rooms with adults and say, really, how do we know someone's gender? How do we get that definitive knowledge? What adults tend to go to is our bodies, that we have a specific set of genitalia. We have XX chromosomes or we have XY chromosomes, and there you go. Well, so that's the message that I got along the way as well. What I did not understand, however, is that it actually isn't quite that simple. If you have or haven't heard the term intersex before, the term intersex describes a number of physiological differences that exist in humans. And that can be variations in our chromosomal makeup. So XX, XY is not end of story. There's X, XY, there's XYY, there's XO, there's a single X, there's a triple X. Some people have XX and XY chromosomes both. It's pretty varied. Intersex differences also include genitalia differences, and that could be internal genitalia or external genitalia, and some endocrine differences as well. My understanding, I'm not a significant expert on this topic at all, but these intersex differences number upwards of over 30 different variations, which are not news. You know, I could have had the opportunity to learn that when I hit a biology class, but that conversation didn't happen. Okay, so we have 30 plus identifiable differences, and okay, how frequent is that? Well, the numbers that I found, I think is it up there? Yeah, roughly 1 in 300 people. That's a lot of people. I happen to be an identical twin. So if you've met anybody an identical twin, I always like to find out. What? Do you love it?
Oh, I don't have one, but my
Oh,
husband's a
you-
twin and they're called family.
Well, in case you did, you probably already know, but when we're identical twins, we feel pretty special.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
It's annoying. 7 minutes older, things that are really important to share. But the frequency of identical twins, if you've encountered a set of twins along the way, is roughly 1 in 1,000 people. So that's a high number. 1 in 300 means you all have met people with intersex differences. You may not know that about them. As a matter of fact, that person may not know themselves that they have an intersex difference. Some of those differences are really minor in the way that they manifest. And some are more pronounced. I think there's probably a couple that require some type of medical intervention. But nevertheless, far more than I would have thought. And so why don't we know about these things? Why aren't we talking about, if we're talking about chromosomes, why would we not bring in the variations of chromosomal makeup that humans experience? Well, I don't really know the answer to that, except that it's less common, so I think it's helpful if we start bringing that into a conversation, because then we can recognize that you don't just like take a look between your legs and have your answer. I want to give one example. A woman who I met a number of years ago who speaks quite brilliantly on this subject of intersex differences. And she shared her story with me. She shares it. She speaks publicly about it. That along the way, as a teenager, she and her fellow classmates, some of them are starting their menstruation cycle, and she's not. And so she's waiting and waiting. And at some point is really waiting and speaks with her mother. Her mother says, "Oh, honey, the women in our family are all late bloomers. So enjoy your time off. It'll show up, and there you go." So she waits still, and she ends up moving through high school, has not started her period. She's 22 years old, and she finally just says, "I have to know what's going on," and makes an appointment with the doctor. Doctor runs whatever tests they do, invites her back and says, "Sit down." I don't ever want that experience where tests have been run and somebody says, "Sit down." But nevertheless, that's what she got. And her physician says, "Well, you have what's called androgen insensitivity syndrome." And so that's one of those 30 plus differences. And what that means is your chromosomes are XY, which we tend to associate with men. But because you have this insensitivity or just no response to androgens, when she was born, she looks identifiably female. And then that was cute. And she continues to develop as female. Don't quote me on this because I am not a biology major myself, but my understanding is that our baseline, we all start out looking very much the same, and it tends to fall into the female category. And then when those androgens happen in utero, this switch gets flipped and that we turn this corner or that corner, and our bodies start to distinguish themselves. So because she didn't have that response to the androgens, she just continued forward in her development. So ta-da, it's a girl, and except that it's a girl who can't menstruate. She gets this news. The physician says, yeah, so it's probably best that you don't talk about this. So you have your information, you know what's going on now. Don't talk about it. By the way, I'm sorry, you can't have any children. And it rocks her world, right? She's recently married. She thinks my husband is going to ask for divorce, and she goes home and can barely get the words out. Finally tells him what's going on. And he says, "Well, okay, honey, but what's for dinner?" And I thought she was, kind of exaggerating a story until I actually met the guy. And that's what he does. He comes in the door and dinner is first. They've been married for decades since But she took this doctor's advice and didn't talk about it. And what happened for her was it just ate her up on the inside to have something that was such an impactful experience in her life, and know that because of stigma associated with this, because of the advice of this person, don't talk about it. You know, she just couldn't take it anymore. And I think it took her about 15 years. And she finally started talking about it, and she has not stopped for, it's been quite a number of decades now. And so she speaks to this and offers support to families who have children with this particular intersex difference. And yeah, is working to elevate the conversation. Now, our conversation today isn't about intersex differences, but I think it's helpful to realize that our basic foundation, or at least I'll speak for myself, my basic foundational understanding of gender is boys, girls, men, women, XX, XY. And now I know something different. So what happens if you have any of these differences? So how does this impact your life? You look at my colleagues' cells under a microscope, and you're going to see XY chromosomes. So you're going to identify that person as a man. Well, that is not her experience. That's not her identity. That's not her upbringing. And even with that information, she didn't say, oh, well, I wonder if I'm really a man. So I do think that that can be helpful to understand. The acronym DSD that's also up there, that stands for disorders of sex development. That's another term to describe these intersex differences. Why are there two terms? Well, once the DSDs are definitely used more in the medical community, but the people who have these types of differences aren't as fond of that term, because they're busy saying, you know, I'm human. Humans are diverse, our bodies are diverse, and I happen to have an intersex difference. So they tend to use that, and also because they feel like it's a little less stigmatizing. So if you encounter either term, know that they're talking about the same thing. Okay, so I started this whole anecdote out by saying, hey, if I'm talking to a group of adults, this is what they say. We know our gender based on our genitalia and our chromosomal makeup. And, you know, I'm here to tell you, it's just not that clear. Just not that clear. Okay, and what about it? I'm right, I'm wrong, doesn't really matter, because we are not looking at genitals or chromosomes to make a gender determination about folks. I could, you know, take my best guesses about your gender, and I bet I'd be pretty darn accurate without you dropping pants or pulling out a chromosomal ID card. So let's move on to this next slide. And let me also say that when I ask that question of kids, this is the area they go, this category that's called gender expression. And we're using our eyes, sometimes our ears, to assess gender. Kids will say things like, well, you know, boys have short hair and girls have long hair. Okay, except that I just get to stand there. I don't have to do a darn thing because another kid steps in and says, well, that's not true. My aunt has really short hair and she's a girl. Oh, well, let's see. Girls paint their fingernails, boys don't. And I just wait half a second and another kid says, no, my cousin paints his fingernails. He's a boy. One kid said, well, boys like to blow up things. And I, you know, there was a moment or two of silence and I'm trying to figure out, well, how do I address that one? Except that a kid raised her hand and said, I like to blow up things. I'm a girl. And I think one of my favorites was men have gray hair and women don't. And right in that moment, you know, it's almost as if my mom magically appeared and she's ready to read the riot act about society and the expectations about how women should look 25 years old their entire lives from start to finish. And I'm thinking, but they're second graders. How do I dig into this? But again, another second goes by and a kid says, no, women have gray hair too. It's all right here. And, I thought, well, I got where I needed to get, which is men and women have gray hair. A person paints their fingernails. And the brilliant part of the conversations with kids is that they really readily recognize that the things that they mention are not accurate. But they might say, well, yeah, pink's a girl's color and blue is a boy's color. Well, that's my understanding, except that I've done a little homework and I had found out that pink was the boy's color, mid 40s and earlier, and it switched. And why did it switch? I don't really know, but it did switch. Blue is considered soft and feminine. Okay, I've looked up high heels. There's a long history with high heels, and it did not start with women. Women ultimately appropriated that and grabbed it to adopt status and any number of things. It's very interesting. High heels originated in Persia for warriors on horseback. It helped give them greater stability with the saddle. So any number of things you can go backwards. As a matter of fact, I did one time, I thought, well, let's look at names, right? There's the Marians and the Beverleys, and Phyllis's, and the list goes on and on. Those used to be men's names. We see that today. We've got also, I mean, there's a lot of girls out there with the name Michael these days, or Riley, or any number of other names that at least I have associated with a particular gender. These children are also very frustrated. It doesn't matter how old they are or how young they are, because they're busy being told what they can or can't do because of their gender. And that's what they want to talk about. They want to share that. And I remember being pretty surprised, because I don't know that I would have heard this when I was growing up, but listening to boys say, it's really not fair. Girls get to wear all the colors. We get blue, black, brown. They say it just like that. Girls get to wear skirts and dresses, pants and shorts, and we only get pants and shorts. I thought, well, that's a one-off. That's this one kid that's saying something, except I've heard it any number of times. That's not fair. That's not fair. And in those conversations with children, are clothes just clothes? Should we be able to wear the clothes that we want to wear? Is our hair boys' hair, girls' hair? No, my hair is my hair. The activities that we engage in, boys do this, girls don't. Those are questions those kids are hungry for. And those things change. Girls, I tell kids, girls at one point were not allowed to wear pants or shorts to school or to the workplace. And those little kids, they look at me like, you are pulling our leg. And usually I'm fortunate enough to have a teacher in the room that can back me up, because they don't believe it. That's not an old history. That's, that was certainly my mother's experience at the very least. So being able to take a look at this conversation and say what we do when we look at someone to make a gender determination is serving us pretty dang well, but not entirely. So the third concept I want to bring in is gender identity. Well, what the heck is that? Not a term that I grew up hearing. I don't know exactly when I started hearing it. It was definitely into my adulthood. Well, what's gender identity? That's a person's internal sense of their own gender. Well, okay. That sounds fantastic, as in fantastical and made up, or what? So what do we know about that? I want to say that we are learning more about gender identity, and specifically neurobiological differences in the brain, that areas of the brain that correlate with gender. And what does this all mean? Where are we going with this? So while the scientific community is learning or teaching us more and discovering different things about the brain, here we are at a moment in time, a moment in history, which I will talk a little bit more about, where we're considering gender identity. I want to show you a quick video. Hopefully everything's good sound-wise and all that. But I have a little clip I will show you from a documentary called Gender Revolution. It's on National Geographic website. I think it's on Netflix. I'm not sure where all it's available. Yeah, I'll segue. So Katie Couric hosts it. And I think the reason that she was interested in this subject herself is because she had 2 transgender women on her program once and she was interviewing them. Laverne Cox, if you've ever watched Orange is the New Black, transgender woman who plays that character, a character who is also transgender. And then also a model, Carmen Carrera. So she has these 2 women on there and she's talking to them, and Katie Couric kind of goes where other people do, which is starts asking them about how do you navigate genitals? Like, can you tell us more about that? Right? Who wouldn't have a thought about that? How does that work if you're a model? What are you modeling? Our curiosity is definitely there. So she asks them in a very polite way. And these 2 women just shut her down. They just said, no. We are done talking about our genitalia. We're done satisfying the curiosity of society as a whole. If you need to satisfy your own curiosity, get on the internet and do some research. But there are so many more important things that need talking about. Both of these trans women are women of color. So they talked about the violence that especially trans women of color experience. They said there's just so many more crucial and life-threatening issues to talk about, including employment and homelessness and things like that can occur, that we're not going to spend this airtime talking about genitalia. Katie Couric was a little surprised and she was very gracious about it and said, well, I guess I have a little bit of learning to do, and stepped in to do a documentary with National Geographic. So this, if you're interested in it, again, it's called Gender Revolution, but I'm going to show you just part of it.
We know that scientists believe that something happens to the trans brain while it's developing in utero. But there's also some evidence from human brains examined post-mortem that seems to show trans brains are in fact different. And ground zero is the hypothalamus, the tiny nerve center that controls your heart rate, sleep, and metabolism. Scientists initially believed that the hypothalamus of a gay man would resemble that of a woman. But what they found surprised them.
Down below, we have the staining pattern of a gay man. The picture above is the staining pattern of a straight man. And observe, there is no difference between the gay man and the straight man. However, over here in this corner, we have the staining pattern for a transgender woman. And observe that even though her external body parts at birth may have been male, she has the same staining pattern as the non-transgender, as the cisgender woman. What it tells us is that there are areas in the brain that correlate with gender identity and not with external body parts.
But it's not just hormones, like testosterone, influencing how our brains are wired. It may also be in our genes. Why do scientists think that? A 2012 study out of Belgium found that among fraternal twins who do not share identical DNA, the likelihood that if one twin is trans, the other will be is very low. But among identical twins, the likelihood shoots up to 40%. What does that mean?
Well, what that says to me is that your DNA is playing a role here, because the identical twins essentially share the same DNA, whereas the non-identical twins don't.
We don't know if this is one gene or 8 genes or a group of genes that are affected in slightly different ways, but I absolutely do believe that we will have a day when you can do either a brain scan or a blood test, and we will be able to say that, yes, your kid has the biology in their brain for the opposite gender identity.
From my perspective, it's a pretty simplistic representation, what's there. But it is speaking to this notion that there's more to it than what we have thought. There's more to determining our gender beyond our genitalia. And I'm not sure about any of you, but I imagine you had a sense of your gender. And if I were to ask, you'd say, well, as young as I can remember, I don't remember not knowing my gender. And I imagine that that sense of your own gender didn't happen because you happened to look at your genitalia. That's where it's a little interesting to consider the experience of transgender people. Do they have the same sense of their own gender? And then what happens when they articulate that? And society says, well, wait a minute. No, let me correct. You're a boy, you have a penis. You're a girl, you have a vagina. This is the way this goes. Sorry, you're confused. These studies are interesting. Number one, they're doing the staining on the brain cells is a post-mortem effort. So, it'll be interesting to see where that takes us. And during that discussion about here's the woman's brain or the men's brain staining pattern. Here's the woman's brain and the staining pattern in her cells, and the transgender woman who was originally male at birth, but identifying as female. Her brain cells look like the brain cells of other women. Okay, could there be any range in between? Well, of course there can, because we have humans that are 3 or 4 feet tall. We have humans that are 6, 7. I have to check the Guinness Book of World Records, probably over 8 feet on occasion. So are there people in between? Yeah, significant. The majority of people are in between those more extreme height ranges. So could this gender areas in the brain, can that be a range in between? And the answer is yes. And what do we do about that? And do we test for that? And if we test for that, what do we do with that information? It's an interesting conversation. Some might say, well, then we figure out how to correct that. Those discussions have occurred for people with intersex differences as well. And many people are saying, look, this is not a problem. I am a human being. This is my body. There's nothing that needs to be corrected. It's not entirely true because there, again, some of those intersex differences, a couple of them, again, I'm not the expert here on this topic, but do require some medical intervention. So if you have internal genitalia that matches those of women, and you start menstruating and you don't have a vaginal opening, you don't have anywhere for that menstrual blood to go. So that needs to be corrected. Let's see, anything else that I want to say about that video? Yeah, I just feel like that representation was simple in an effort to make a point, but I'm going to add a couple points, which is if you have a man's brain and a woman's brain, there's got to be some in-between stuff. And I imagine if this was a documentary solely about that topic, they would certainly bring that in. Yeah.
When was that documentary made?
20, maybe 16, 15, 16, 17, somewhere in there. Not terribly long ago. Yeah. I mean, and I do feel like our scientific research is continuing to point to physiological reasons. They also mentioned the twin studies and that twins are basically clones of each other on that chromosomal level. So the likelihood that if one person is transgender, one twin, then the other one will be as well, does sort of indicate a potential genetic component. I don't know. We'll find out. Or we'll continue to find out. Let's see. So final concept that I want to bring into our discussion is sexual orientation. I doubt I need to describe or define that to you. Well, describing would be fun. Maybe later. No. Sexual orientation. Who am I? What's my gender? Who's the person I'm attracted to? What's their gender? Boom, you put a label on that. One of the most significant challenges is in my work is that people believe that being transgender is some type of sexual orientation. And I encounter that regularly. I used to show up with some handouts, right? Here's some terms. It's got cisgender on there. It's got gender identity, sexual orientation. And I thought, well, is that enough to help people get this? And theoretically, yes. If I said, well, gender identity is defined this way, sexual orientation is defined this way, they're separate, I would have every head in the room nod. It's not like we can't get it cognitively. But I think there's a visceral element to it as well. And let me just tell you why I think that. You likely have seen the acronym LGBT. Am I missing anything? Yeah, if you have any young people in your lives, you know I don't have stuff on there. There's a million letters. The plus sign means I'm not putting them all on there. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, questioning, the I for intersex differences, any number of other things, 2S together like that. Is the acronym for Two-Spirit people, which are our Native American cultures who, even that is a combination of people who are gender diverse as well as possible sexual orientation differences. I always hesitate to throw this slide up there and say it's problematic, because I could just imagine some people who will say, it's not for you to decide, Aiden. And that's true. It isn't for me to decide. So let me first say why I think an acronym to describe communities of people is helpful. It means that you can find resources out there. If you are a member of the LGBTQ plus communities and you want to find resources, you want to meet people, any number of things. You have a shortcut to Google, LGBTQ, Washington State, see what shows up. It's helpful to understand a movement, a visibility of people on a historical timeline. I think it's helpful in that way. And I think there are a number of reasons to make connections, build friendships and things like that. But in my world, it's really problematic because lesbian, gay, bisexual, P for pansexual, A for asexual, sometimes the D's are for demisexual. What is all of that? But you can hear a whole lot of sexual stuff in that acronym. But you also have a T for a gender identity difference. You have that I, let me go back. The I, which is an anatomical difference. It's describing a difference in a person's physicality. You've got it all lumped together. So what I feel like it does is say, there's this whole group of people and it's all about sex. And I know what heterosexual sex is about, but I don't see an H in that acronym for heterosexual people. And it pretty much describes others and then those who are normal. It puts together gender and sexuality and physiological differences. So am I gonna be able to step into your Snohomish District's office and say, I'm an LGBTQI plus educator, and I'd like to step in and talk to your second graders? Well, probably not, because I'm busy bringing in a topic that is actually, you know, if I'm bringing that sexuality into it, what the heck is pansexual? You're gonna talk to the second graders about that? Wait a minute. No. So I don't brand myself that way. You know, I can talk about different sexual orientations and communities, but that's not my shtick. That's not my passion. I'm going to talk about gender. And I gave you a couple of examples about how kids talk about gender identity and gender expression. Did I? I didn't talk about the gender identity piece yet with kids, so I will get to that. So I want to pull those apart. I want to take sexual orientation and say, you know what, let's just set it aside. And the reason I want to is because I've been to any number of kindergarten classes where a teacher will say, you know what, I have a kid like that in my class every year. And sometimes that kid gets teased or bullied, and I don't know what to say because, you know, I see a kid that's gay, and I'm not supposed to talk about sexuality at that young age. So what I do is kind of nothing. Either I don't say anything, I change the subject, I walk away, whatever. I don't want any teacher doing that when it comes to bullying. I don't know how to intervene, therefore I'm going to walk away, because it doesn't matter how old those kids are. They recognize that. They're like, oh, so I'm teasing this kid a little bit, or so-and-so teased this kid. I saw the discomfort on the teacher's face. I saw that he or she did not do anything about it. That means there's something up with this kid. That means whatever that focused attention is somehow deserving of that. I want that mentality to change, simply because whether I weigh in one way or another, politically or religiously or whatever, I just don't think that 5-year-olds need to torture each other. I don't think 17-year-olds need to torture each other because of who they are. So I want that teacher to be able to intervene. And guess what? Is that 5-year-old gay? Well, who knows, right? Maybe that kid is a boy with a more feminine, what we consider a feminine expression. And maybe he will grow up to be gay. Or maybe he'll just be a boy who loves having long hair, and that's that. We aren't making those determinations any more than we might step into a class and say, well, while I'm viewing that one kid over there as gay, potentially, well, there's little Susie and she's probably heterosexual. There's not attention on the heterosexual normative identities. We're not worrying about whether Susie is going to grow up to be heterosexual. We're just busy making assumptions. Yeah, I could go down that path a lot, but ultimately, where do we see a greater degree of visibility of femininity in men than the gay community? There's a cultural acceptance, a greater degree, not entirely, but a greater degree of acceptance for some expression of femininity. And same with women who might be a little more what we consider on the masculine spectrum. If you've ever chatted with anyone in the lesbian community, which I have, you can hear about how someone is, well, they're in the city and they can identify the lesbians, at least some of them, visually, like, oh, probably, right? And then they go to Montana and they think every woman there is a lesbian because maybe those women in that community are a little more down to earth. They work on the farm. They have their coveralls, you know, whatever. You know, we don't really know. Say again?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you can say that if you want. So I really, again, I want to pull apart this sexuality piece. The way kids look at gender identity is very simple and straightforward. It is in my heart and in my mind. So one parent shared with me the story where she finally realized she needed to pay attention to what her kid was saying because he said, "Mom, when are you going to get it?" And I think he was about 5 or 6. "I may have the body of a girl, but I have the heart and mind of a boy." And, you know, he'd been trying to say all this stuff for quite a number of years, but that was her wake up call. And that's where she said, I've got to figure this out. It's very simple and straightforward. Do we give it attention? Do we give that validity? Well, those are the big questions on the table right now. And that is why the conversation about gender differences with respect to transgender people or other terms like non-binary, there's a lot of terms to describe different gender identities. That's why we're busy saying, well, you know, what are we doing here? It is massively disrupting a norm, a status quo, an understanding of gender that is simple and straightforward. I think it's reasonable to have conversations about it. And that's what I do every day of my life for 20 plus years, is have those conversations and say, well, let's play it out. How does this look if we're talking about this? Let me ponder something. Yes, perfect timing so I can get a sip of water.
So with the prevalence of this topic and, you know, it being covered from adults down to children, and also with the scientific evidence that you showed us, how do you differentiate children per se wanting to do this, like the change, or the need to do it from a biological standpoint?
Yeah.
How have you encountered that?
You need time. I mean, really, pretty simply, you're not going to take a kid and run off and get a test. I've had parents on the parent support program side of things say, is there, you know, who do I go to get a diagnosis? And I'm busy letting them know that a diagnosis is just difficult to find. You know, kids 5 years old. You're going to let them make a decision like that when they're 5? How do you know? Well, the reality is that you don't know. So being able to, as a matter of fact, that family was kind of interesting because I explained some things to them about the desire to pursue a diagnosis and how that was grasping at air. And they said, well, we get it, but our extended family, they're going to really need this diagnosis or they're not going to get on board at all. And so they wanted someone with degrees and a professional perspective to sign off on it. How you think about this? I'm going to get to it. I'm going to definitely dig more into that. But it is the question on the table. And what I think is helpful is to at least start by saying we as humans tend to know who we are. But if we get different messages, especially that category of gender expression, boys do this, girls do that, and that doesn't fit with who we are and our interests and all of that, would a little kid say, well, I am a girl, a kid that we see as a boy. I am a girl because I like playing with dolls. So does that mean that kid is a girl? It doesn't. We know nothing about what that means except what the kid said, which is I like playing with dolls. That's the only fact that we have. So there could be boys who like to play with dolls. And as they get older, they call them action figures rather than dolls. But what do we know about their gender? We don't. And so to me, if a kid is articulating that, that's an invitation for more exploration. Well, why do you feel like you're a girl? Well, because I like playing with dolls and girls play with dolls. Well, a lot of boys play with dolls, maybe not as many as girls, but nevertheless, boys play with dolls too. Oh, okay, then I'm a boy that likes to play with dolls. So that's a start of a conversation. But that kid could say, well, yeah, it's not about dolls. It's about more. Well, what else? You know, what else? And finding those things out. Now, how do you get to that place of knowing whether that's a real gender identification of this kid and perhaps that neurobiological difference, or just a kid who's viewing a world and wants to be in this part of the world because that aligns more with their interests? We have to discover that. And the nice thing about a 5-year-old is that we don't have to do a darn thing to get more information, at least as far as permanent steps. We're not starting a 5-year-old on hormones. We're not considering any type of surgeries or anything like that. But it doesn't mean that society doesn't feel like that is forthcoming. And if there's anything that I feel is truly helpful for these families trying to sort out those very questions, is to help them understand that you don't need to know. What you need to do is expand the conversation, discover more, allow time to go by. Shutting down a kid, not so good. That teaches a child to hide their interests. And frankly, that's a little bit of I mean, that sort of describes our societal shift over the past probably at least a couple decades of really actively looking at children and gender. You know, adults, they get to adulthood, 18 just seems ridiculously young, but nevertheless, they're of legal age of consent. So if they make a decision and they change their mind and feel like that was the wrong thing, well, it wasn't like I wasn't there to try to warn them, or someone else might have been there. We can detach a little bit more because of that adult factor. But kids, no. And what happens is that we adopt a couple of approaches. One is let's wait and see. Like, let's just see if this plays out. But it's often a very hands-off and or correcting. So our mental and medical health communities have said, hey, look, gender is malleable. And what's happening with this kid is that they might be confused. Maybe it's a gender identity difference, maybe not. But let's work with this kid. Let's try to mold them, steer them, guide them back to more gender congruent interests, behaviors, etc. that matches their body, their genitalia. Mom's probably way overbearing, way too involved, coddling, you know, any number of descriptors. And dad's probably not involved enough. So if dad's in the picture, then dad needs to spend more time, grab that football and toss it around. If the dad's not in the picture, find a male role model. A lot of societal ills are blamed on women and mothers. We could probably spend the rest of the day talking about those categories. But regardless, any family composition, any type of child rearing, those kids are in those families, and those parents are busy feeling extremely distressed and tortured about what to do. My advice is take a deep breath. All right, do it again. And let's figure out what's on the table today. As a matter of fact, I have a daughter. She's 31. 31? Yeah, almost 32. I've told her whole life, stop getting older. She does not listen. So nevertheless, when she was about 3 years old, she came up to me one day, nothing different about that day in the house. She comes up and she goes, I'm a boy. And I thought, I'm looking around, what is she playing with something that's more for boys? You know, I couldn't figure out what it was and I didn't know what to say. So I just said, okay. And that was all she needed to say. She turned and went back to whatever she was doing, and I watched, like, what was she doing? Nothing that I could see that would inspire this. She spent the next couple months making a comment, only a couple of times. She would never articulate what was inspiring her to say that either to me or to someone else. Okay, and I remember a friend being over and she said that to the friend, and the friend looked at me and I said, I didn't correct her, and I just let it be. That kid would not put a dress or a skirt on if her life depended on it. No. The next school year rolls around, I can't get that kid out of a skirt or dress. She just went whole hog the other way, whatever that means. All right, fast forward. She's just moving through life as a girl. I've talked to her about this. She has no recollection that she said that. She hits 8th grade and she comes to me. She's like, I don't get girls. They get upset about something, but can they tell you why they're upset? No. I like hanging out with guys. They're more laid back. We just hang out. We just have a good time. And I thought, interesting, because that, my kid's temperament is very laid back. My sister's kid, completely opposite. As a matter of fact, my sister's kid and my sister, I can make them cry in a heartbeat just by telling them, looking at them with little, what's that show, Shrek, with the Puss in Boots, right? Little Puss in Boots eyes, and say, I love you so much. Boom. So the emotional expression in my niece is quite different than in my own daughter. Okay, I realize the emotional expression of my kid is much more common in boys. But she's not talking about a gender identity difference. And to the best of my knowledge, this child is a young heterosexual woman, well, 31-year-old heterosexual woman who has a gender expression that is more feminine, not ultra feminine. And to the best of my knowledge, she has not ever mentioned anything about a gender identity difference. Now, I could have had a different response to her as a kid and said, no, you're a girl. But that kid looked pretty serious. And I didn't feel like duking it out with her. So I just let it play out. So I'm saying that because I think it is reasonable to let these things play out. Do you need to contradict the kid? Well, sometimes kids who are transgender and I've heard too many stories of this happening, especially with kids who are boys, they're assigned male at birth, who are saying that they're girls, and then someone comes along and says, no, you're not a girl, and here's why. You have a penis that proves you're a boy, irrefutable proof, and next thing they know, that little 4 or 5-year-old is in the bathroom with scissors or a knife, either contemplating cutting it off or actually trying. Now that's dangerous. That is a life-threatening event. And those little kids can find their way to the emergency rooms. Are they distressed with their penis? Well, they probably weren't before. But since they're being told that they are not who they are because of it, then they think, well, I'll just get rid of it and then I can go on about being a girl. So again, how do you know? Well, holy moly, hopefully not by getting experiencing something that extreme. So again, I just feel like it's a stepping in. Maybe I belabored that question too much there, but let me also share with you a couple of things. What do I want to do about this? So let me step back a little bit and say, hey, what we did before on the recommendations of professionals was to try to mold a person's gender identity. We have studies that have shown that that's not effective and it's actually pretty harmful. That when that gender identity was not validated. The risk factors that these people experience was really significant. There's been studies of adults, so people over 18, who have some type of gender identity difference. They identify as trans in some way. And they surveyed them and found that every measure for risk factors, whether that was a suicide attempt or drug and alcohol abuse, homelessness, HIV or STD infection, any number of things, was so much higher in this population of people. They called the study injustice at every turn because no matter what it was just outrageous. I don't have all those numbers for you. I do remember one, the a suicide attempt in this population who did not receive support as a young person was 41%. Like, that's outrageous. You know, that's about, you know, all of you would have tried to take your own life and were successful or unsuccessful in that effort enough to take a survey later. Compared to a national average, which is single digits in the range of, you know, 1 to 3% or something like that. So 41% is just outrageous. And there are other studies that validate that one. Did I say that? It's called Injustice at Every Turn. So if you're wanting to look that up. But there's another study that came out of, they're called the Family Acceptance Project. That's been going on for quite a number of years as well. And they did similar inquiry. Their results were matching, but they also asked a different question. Did any of you as a kid have the support of at least one adult in your life? Didn't have to be a parent, you know, just somebody that said, hey, you know, I think you're amazing. You're awesome the way you are. And got that support from that either parent or a teacher or a neighbor or who knows what, aunt or uncle. Wow, those numbers for that group that answered yes for one adult, way down to the numbers that are the national average. Their risk factors were radically reduced. And so it's studies like those that have caused the professional entities to re-examine. So gosh, you know, we thought we could change these things, and it appears maybe not. It appears that maybe what we're doing is teaching them to hide, teaching them that who they are is bad and wrong, that needs correction, that, you know, needs any number of things besides support. And saying, well, what if we support those children? Well, what does that mean? What does that even mean to support them in that? And I think that's what we're busy stepping into, especially in our schools. How do we support them? Washington State added gender identity and gender expression to the state's anti-discrimination language in 2006. And I'm pretty sure, I haven't polled these legislators themselves, but if I were to go track them down and say, how was that when you were talking about that? Hey, we don't want to discriminate based on gender identity, gender expression. They're busy thinking about adults. Yeah, well, should somebody lose their job because they happen to be a transgender person? Well, it doesn't feel good, you know? It doesn't feel right. So let's add some protections. But how does that play out in schools? I'm not so sure there was thought about that, because who was thinking about it? The visible presence of transgender children in schools has been relatively a short span of time, a decade and a half, maybe 2 at the most. And so, wow, okay. Well, the state superintendent's office said, well, okay, we can't discriminate based on gender identity or gender expression. So what does that mean? Let's play it out. Let's have some guidelines for schools. Well, they issued those guidelines in 2012. And where did they get them? Well, I think they adopted them from somebody who did it the day before. That might have been I'm trying to think of California and maybe Minnesota. They found some schools that had some guidelines. And they adopted those and thought, well, this sounds good. It has to do with names and pronouns and bathrooms and privacy and dress codes, things like that. And as I was beginning my work in schools, probably 5 years prior or so, 5 or 6 years prior to that, I thought, well, how great, Washington's got these guidelines, but who's out there talking to these folks and telling them how to do this or why they're doing it? They're telling them what to do with these, half a dozen or a dozen guidelines, but they're not telling them how, they're not telling them why. And that's a huge piece that's missing. And I think that's why my world is so busy. Yeah.
I think also to put that in perspective, there are still 29 states where those coverages do not apply.
Yeah.
To individuals.
Yeah. Yep. It's significant. So if you track those legislators down, don't tell them that I said this, but I think that, they were either oblivious to how it might apply to young people. And, why would they think about that? If any of us, I didn't grow up with transgender kids at school. Not one iota thought about it. Does it mean that they weren't there? Well, probably not. So, yeah. So what do we do about that? I think we're busy sorting that out. Not just in your district here, but everywhere. Washington State, interestingly, simply because of those couple of early steps, has then been in a position of figuring out how and why. I have chatted with the folks at OSPI about this. I'm like, well, I have some thoughts that could be helpful, and I'm watching people madly scribble in those meetings. Being able to pull apart the distinctions between gender identity and sexual orientation. I'm going to shift gears for a second because I want to highlight that, but go for it. Yeah.
I was just going to ask, we take a 5-minute break.
Yes.
If you're going to shift gears.
Yeah, I say it's a good time. My bladder's kind of in me. So. Yeah. What? 10 minutes or something? 5 minutes?
Oh, I said 5, but you said 10.
How about we do 7?
7.
Yeah.
Yes.
Spray one. Yep, didn't figure it. I was making sure where it didn't stay. Oh, that's sick. I got it on top. Also, it run once you turn off.
I got my research. They've been a partner. Yeah, I don't know.
You have the same. So you could just like make the best of So we had that. Part of that phone had that. We're big ring on it. She likes the same. Yeah. Yeah. That was like, okay.
Show me your license.
Oh. Yeah, look at that Volvo. Oh, Volvo?
Yeah.
Yeah, roll over, do whatever you want.
They are now. Let me know.
There's. Are you ready?
Right, I guess we'll dig back in. See, I chatted about the injustice at every turn, the family acceptance project. And what about now? If these young people, and trust me, I think if there's interest and curiosity about adult trans people, we're definitely getting there. But again, I'm just sharing with you some stuff about these kids because I think it's really helpful. And in some respects, I think it's a little easier to think about gender identity if we're thinking about children, as opposed to that sort of intersection that we as adults can do with gender identity and sexual orientation. So today there's a 20-year longitudinal study out of Princeton. It was at the University of Washington at its inception. It's probably 7 years into it now, 7 of the 20. Princeton wooed this team over there because of this project, which is really looking at the lives of these kids as they receive support from their families for their gender identity. And support is a big word that has a lot of aspects to it, but nevertheless, are those families that are stepping in and saying, well, we've got something going on, we don't necessarily know what. So they've been publishing since early on. And a couple of the things that I just want to mention with respect to this project is that just like the Family Acceptance Project, what they're seeing in their numbers are that these kids that get support are doing really well. That their distress, their anxiousness, their depression, whatever that is so often associated with being transgender is no more prevalent than the kids who are not trans. They have transgender children in the study. They also have a number of those families with siblings. So they're looking at that because in case there's some sort of factor with the child rearing in that home, they could see similar or dissimilar things with those kids. And then they have a control study that is nothing related to those particular transgender children. And one of the things that they discovered is the power of the parental support. And the second is their understanding of gender, their gender cognition. These are child psychologists. They know how to do these things. I don't really know all of the methods, but I do know that they have explicit measures and implicit measures that test their sense of self and their sense of gender. The explicit measures are interesting. It's a kid that says, well, I like these toys, or I like these activities that we associate with gender. But also implicit measures are ones that, you just don't get to think about it. They're quick observations. And so that kid is not having time to think, well, what does this person want me to say? Or what do I think I should say in this situation? So their sense of their own gender matches that of kids who are not transgender. So just like any kid would say, well, you know, this is my gender, end of story. These other kids are being able to articulate their gender just as clearly. So, you know, kind of from where I sit, I think, well, yeah, that's my understanding. That's what I've observed. They know who they are. But from the world's perspective, it's pretty earth shaking. And the interest in this study and all of its all the published content that is rolling out over these years is of significant interest. Because again, it's kind of new. You know, it's kind of new to step in with these young folks and say, oh, well, you say you're a boy, you say you're a girl, well, let's step into that. I will talk a little bit more about what that means to step into it, but I did want to at least mention that study and say, gosh, you know, I'm really looking forward to the journey and see what shows up. It's very, very difficult for just about any family to step in and support these children. It's why the support program that we have is going gangbusters, national, every state represented, several countries represented, and they're stepping on Zoom groups and talking with us, talking with each other. And, you know, there's any number of factors that I could rattle off that are pretty consistent. I used to say, not one parent have I ever met was happy about having a trans kid. Until a family said, well, we were. And I said, oh, okay. And they said, well, the reason that we were is because we had our kid on suicide watch. We did not know what was going on. We absolutely thought we were going to lose our child. And so this transgender thing, I can get on board with that. Whatever that is, I don't know. But if it means my kid's alive versus dead, they were, and that is the factor, the only factor where I've heard these families say, yeah, I was pretty happy to discover this. In my world, political differences and faith differences show up as a topic of conversation pretty consistently. And if you think that those Seattle families that are all hippy dippy and, you know, all woke and whatever are excited about having a trans kid, they're not. They're absolutely not. And they're also often surprised at their own resistance, because they could have, their close friend could have a transgender kid. And they're like, yeah, you got to love and support them. And it hits home and it's a different story. So I say this to just to share with you that while the conversation has ramped up on the political realm, while there is significant distress when it comes to faith values and all of that, trust me, these families look a lot alike. And so let me see if I can share with you a little bit about why I think that is, you know, my thoughts anyway. Okay. So from my perspective, my upbringing, I got messages about who transgender or gender, some type of gender difference from a lot of movies or things like that. And I just gonna share some of those with you. So Psycho, serial killer, well, was he a serial killer? It's been a long time. He at least was able to kill. And he was able to kill with a wig on, a woman's dress, changing his voice to sound more feminine. So nobody ever said, well, this was a transgender person, but boy, I tell you what, if I see a man in a dress, it could indicate some a real danger for me. If I needed another movie, I could find one. Silence of the Lambs. This was more stated. The serial killer in this film was identified as somebody who was wanting to pursue a sex change, There was a caveat in the film, if you watched it. Well, he's not a true transsexual. He just thinks he is. Well, like, I don't know how many people grabbed a hold of that little tidbit. And, we have to consider the source, which was another serial killer commenting about it. So it didn't inspire a lot of confidence there. I don't know if any of you saw the Crying Game, maybe from the 90s-ish. Say again?
I saw it.
Yeah, so we find out, I don't know if you knew ahead
It
of
was
time.
shocking. I didn't know.
Right. So the character on the left, her love interest on the right finds out that she's a transgender woman. About, I don't know, halfway through the movie. So it was a big deal movie at the time because of this reveal aspect to it. And the first thing that happens is the guy races to the bathroom to vomit. Okay, well, that's harsh, except it was very, I don't even know what I'm trying to say with that. It's harsh when I think about it today. How about that? At the time, it was shocking. Say again?
It invoked a visceral reaction.
Yes.
Like just watching it. So I could imagine being the person that.
Right, there's the shock. What I think is important to recognize in that this particular moment in the film communicates is that there can be a pretty shocking and visceral reaction. And what happens after that? Well, this guy goes to vomit. And that's pretty benign compared to what happens in real life, which is when a trans woman could be murdered. Now, you can debate the question of whether she should have told him in advance. In this film, she says, what do you mean you didn't know? Because she was they met in a club that was full of transgender people. So this guy walks in and I guess is just oblivious about the whole thing. And I can't remember if they did a flashback or something that when you saw that same bar scene, like, oh, yeah, there was a lot of transgender people in that environment. So she assumes he knows. He doesn't. He has a pretty extreme reaction. But if he gets violent, or like it does happen, somebody gets murdered, is that a defense? It is put forth as a defense. Does somebody deserve to be killed because they didn't share that? I don't know. I have opinions, which are no, I don't feel like that's a good reason, but nevertheless, if attorneys are putting this forth as a panic defense, then, there we go. I do think because this film was in the 90s, and it might have been the first time any number of us were seeing something like that, it was a shock. Well, what would happen? And today we have a more visible presence than during that time of transgender people. Knowing that there's a possibility somebody could be transgender is much more likely. Many of you raised your hand and said, yeah, I've encountered trans people before. So I think that visibility and awareness that trans people exist makes a difference. There was the Ace Ventura, that film, similar sort of thing. The Jim Carrey's character realizes he's kissed a transgender woman, straight to the bathroom to vomit. But in Jim Carrey character style, like caricatured. Huge vomit, like pouring caustic chemicals down his throat. Can't remember. Stripping clothes off, throwing them in the waste basket, setting them on fire. I think the scene ends with him in a fetal position at the bottom of a hot shower sobbing. Because there's nothing worse than kissing a transgender woman. Well, she was hot, so I don't know if that would be my reaction. But other things too, Pat from Saturday Night Live, I laughed just like anybody else at those skits. If you've seen them, Pat's this sort of gender ambiguous character. We never hear a pronoun. We don't know Pat's gender. Pat's partner is Chris. You know, these sort of names that you can't really definitively assign to a particular gender. And, you know, Saturday Night Live. I thought it was pretty funny. And I've gone back to look at them. And actually, it's not very kind. That character, I mean, even the representation just says, ugh, you know, like this person's kind of skeezy. And people are uncomfortable. It's obvious that anyone interacting with Pat is uncomfortable trying to figure out Pat's gender. I don't know that I didn't watch the movie. I don't know if anybody ever did, but did anybody ever ask Pat, you know, hey, what about your gender? I don't know, but nevertheless, that was the center of the whole skit. You know.
Question.
Yeah.
Okay, so that begs a question. We get these people in the back of our magazine say I get tapped, and it's medically pertinent. Female. I already broached that topic. You only have a relationship with these people for 16.
Right.
And then from a documentation, they might identify as one way, but they are biologically
another way.
Female, that could be.
Yeah.
How do we go to this topic? And it might be a patient, it might be a company, press them, and whatever. How do we cover that in just a short span of time that we are?
Okay, you're gonna make sure I get to it, and I'm gonna get to that pretty soon.
Okay.
And if somebody didn't have that question, I would be asking my buddy Aaron, like, what happened? How could people not have that question? So thanks for bringing it in, and I'm gonna dive into it in just a second. So Rocky Horror, right? I love the movie. It's fun and, you know, sweet transvestite from transsexual Transylvania. It's very campy. It's not necessarily a movie I would be tossing in front of a group of kindergartners. Hypersexual references all throughout. As a matter of fact, I remember asking my mom if I could go see it because it was at midnight. It started at midnight. And I was supposed to be home by then. And she said, no, you can't. I'm not letting you watch that garbage. And I'd already seen it. I just wanted to see it again. So I told her that. I said, well, you know, I've already seen it. And she goes, well, then I guess you don't need to see it again. Parents. One more image I want to show you. I found this book. It's from the, I don't know, mid-70s, somewhere in there. And I thought, oh my gosh, this so epitomizes where we get our gut negative reactions. If we've been looking at these skits, these films, a book like this, I mean, really, the woman trapped in the man's body sort of narrative, big scalpel slicing away the man so the woman can come out. The scalpel ends at the genitals. The why and how of sex change operations. There's a video, like maybe a DVD or something that goes with it, and it says absolutely, you know, 18 and over. The content is put forth as, you know, X-rated. Well, if that's our mentality, if that's what we've been presented, then yeah, how the heck is Aiden Key going to step in and talk to a group of fourth graders? You know, we're just not going to let that happen. So let's go back and just leave that there. I wanted to show this to you because I feel like those kinds of things are what I grew up learning about. I didn't learn about like children have, young people have today are transgender characters in their shows. or non-binary characters, or, whatever, those representations are, yeah, well, this is one of the kids at their school. And the focus isn't even necessarily on their gender, it just happens to be one of their, one of the characters in the program. So I've got this mindset compared to what's present today that's quite different. These representations spell out danger, sexual deviancy, mental illness. Psycho was definitely this, portrayed as this person who was very mentally disturbed. Ridicule, definitely, a repulsive person like Pat, and deception, trying to trick you. Those are some of the themes that are underlying all of this stuff. And so how does that play out? Well, it means that if a trans person does not disclose that information to you prior to taking clothes off, that they're tricking you. If that person doesn't disclose that on that first time of meeting you, they're trying to trick you. Any number of things. And they shouldn't be around children, and et cetera, et cetera. Again, these families are, one of the things that they're so worried about is that no one's going to love their child, because they can't even imagine that somebody could love and be in a relationship with a transgender person. So I've been guilty of those thoughts myself. I'm trying to think, well, I would see an occasional transgender person, and it was typically a transgender woman. And I saw how people treated her and sort of, yeah, I would see, I'd go out to a bar and she's sitting at the end of the bar reading a book and nobody's talking to her the whole night. Okay, that's, excuse me. I usually have all the sounds off, which tortures the people in my life. Why don't you ever answer your phone? And now it's talking to me. I saw on a talk show a transgender man. He's busy telling his story. His spouse is on the show with him. They're talking about their relationship, their child, his career, any number of things. And I remember watching that, and it was probably somewhere in the 90s, maybe the late 90s. And I thought, wow, I didn't know that was possible. Wow, okay. I'd heard of Renee Richards, who was a trans woman, tennis player. Big debate about whether she should participate in the women's tennis circuit or not. And then whatever, the first really visible person in the US was Christine Jorgensen, probably in the late 50s or so. But other than that, I don't really know anybody. So guess what? I'm a young person. I'm working in a restaurant. And this person comes in and I think, I know him. How do I know this guy? And I can't figure it out. I can't place it. Well, I finally did. It's the guy on that talk show. He walked into my restaurant. So I'm busy looking at this guy and I'm thinking, I know things about him. And I couldn't think of what it was. I've had deeply personal things about him. Finally, my light bulb goes off. I've already served him. He's got his kid with him. They're getting some pizza. And what did I do? When I had my light bulb go off, I went around to my staff and I told every person, see that guy out there? He's transgender. He used to be a woman. This dude is just trying to get a bite to eat with his kid. But I felt so strongly about letting everyone know this huge deal that I violated his privacy. Well, did I? He was on national television. Seems reasonable that I could talk about it. But, with what I know today, would I do that? Well, probably not. Would I go up to him and say, I think I saw you on Geraldo Rivera. Were you on there? And he might say, I did appear on that show. And I'm enjoying my lunch with my child, and I would take the hint and say, oh, great, well, it's nice to see you here, and go do my thing. Or he may be excited to talk about it. I don't really know, but I didn't do either of those things. I just went and told everyone else because I had this pretty significant urge to share that information, because if it's not known, those themes like, oh, is he trying to deceive people, showed up for me. I remember a person saying, well, yeah, I am a woman trapped in a man's body and I'm attracted to women, so I'm a lesbian. And I thought, well, what bunch of garbage is that? That sounds like one of the worst pickup lines that I've ever heard if you're trying to, attract a lesbian. And I remember also the same restaurant that I worked at, there was a group of, I don't know if they were trans women or cross-dressers or both, but nevertheless, these tall statured women would come in looking like 50s housewives. The things that they wore, the purse they carried, the finger out, and inside I'm just rolling my eyes and thinking, well, who do you think you're fooling? So I'm there busy being a human in all of this. And then, when I saw this fella on Geraldo, I went, shit, that's me. So I started out on the planet next to my identical twin sister, 2 little girls. I did mention the 7 minutes advantage that I have on her. She seemed really at ease with being a girl and a young woman in the world, and not me. I thought, why don't people see me for who I am? It's school pictures day and my mom won't let me wear my favorite shirt. Well, because it's a boy's shirt. No, it's my shirt, right? It's my favorite shirt. I got these messages early on that who I felt myself to be wasn't seen. I also understood that I was doing something wrong. My sister wasn't, she was doing it right. Fast forward to about 9 years old, bless you. Fast forward to 9 years old, I'm at church. It's the time between Sunday school and the noon service. My mom was pretty kind to me. She knew I absolutely hated wearing dresses. And so most of the time, even at church, I didn't have to do that. But sometimes there's special occasions, Mother's Day, Easter, where she insisted. Even though she knew it would torture me, she thought, well, how it would reflect on her would be even harder. So this was one of those days. I'm wearing this dress. I'm wanting the wall to open up and swallow me because it felt so uncomfortable and so awkward. And so I am against the wall and I'm kind of, hoping my friends don't talk to me or anything. And I'm looking at a couple in the foyer area, a young couple, they've got a couple kids. And I looked at them and I thought, okay, I guess people expect me to grow up and get married and have a family. And at 9, I thought, well, I want that. I want to be married. I want to have a family. And then, boom, my heart sank. Because in that moment, I had a very clear understanding that they expected me to be the mother and the wife. And I thought, how is this? How is this? I'm the dad. I'm the husband. And also at 9 years old, I'm not stupid. I know I'm not going to grow up and somehow magically become a man in the world. And so fast forward to, well, before I fast forward, I will say that was a significant moment of despair. And despair is a strong word for a 9-year-old to experience, but it was there. I make my way through life. I can't rid myself of this gender stuff, but I can ball it up pretty tight. And by the time I got to high school, I could throw a lot of alcohol at it, whatever other drugs I can get my hand on. And so in the late 90s, I'm 20 something, I don't remember, 28, 9, 7, I don't know. I'm looking at Mr. Dude on Geraldo Rivera. And the thing that I understood at 9 years old that was 100% impossible fantasy land is actually not impossible. So in my late 20s, I'm looking at this. That guy walks into my restaurant. I'm bowled over. And then I have information. Difference between impossibility and possibility. But guess what? I'm also aware of how not just I feel about transgender people, but how others feel about them. The contempt, the, you know, pushing away, the ridicule, whatever. And I thought, no, anything but that. Please do not let that be me. The darn thing about epiphanies is that you don't get to epiphanize. I don't know. You don't get to undo it. And so I sat on it, you know, I thought, well, what is this? And at some point, you know, I don't want to, we'll see how far I go down this path here, but I just had a lot of soul searching to do. And I started thinking about those trans women that I had a mild degree of contempt for. And I thought, let me think about this in a different way. This person feels so strongly that internally they are female, that they are willing to not necessarily look very like other women do, because their bodies have gone through significant changes with puberty. The risks that they take are the risk to their relationship with a spouse, that especially at the time, so often that meant that they could not see their children ever again. I've heard some really painful stories from them, that they're doing their darndest to live authentically and not live a lie anymore, to be the woman that they feel themselves to be. And, you know, who am I? Who am I to tell them otherwise? That's a pretty significant repercussions. And so I thought, well, I gotta find a way of acceptance. And actually, one of the things that helped was that I met a transgender woman who, when I met her, she was maybe just back from the gym. She had sweats on, she had her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked kind of jockey, like so many women I knew. And I thought, oh, ding. There was, instead of the women that looked like 50s housewives with purses and tiptoeing on their heels. And I thought, well, this femininity that she's expressing is a better fit. And I've thought long and hard about many things since then. How does somebody find comfort with their gender, and what does it look like? If you think about women, the degree of femininity and the degree of masculinity expressed by women is vast. It's huge. So why would not any trans woman potentially have that same range of engaging with femininity? And this one person was, you know, a gym rat, right? She loved going to the gym. And so that switched something in my brain where I thought, you know, I see it and I understand it better. And who am I? Who am I to step into somebody's life and deny their lifetime journey? And especially as life humbles me and gives this life journey to me. Yeah. So, yeah, what do I do about that? Well, I don't know. A friend of mine, I started talking to people in my life, my friends, my family, and I said, I don't know what's going to happen. I'm exploring this. I feel like it's what I'm realizing about myself is something that I tucked away long and hard quite some time ago. And I'm trying to figure out, well, what do I do about this? Do I step into a lifetime of stigma and isolation and rejection? Will I lose my job? Will I lose my family? Will I lose my relationship? What about my daughter? You know, those are big price tags. And I met people, like I said, that had also some significant loss. And I just kind of crossed my fingers and hoped that I wouldn't experience such significant loss. And I worked my butt off to ensure that I didn't, which what that meant is that I negotiate my own uncertainty, my own apprehension about this, while also helping to manage everyone else's. You know, my twin sister was not a happy camper with this. She was scared. Her very first gut level reaction within probably me talking with her about this was to wonder whether I should be around my niece or not. My niece was 5. Wow. You know, talk about cutting to the heart. Like as she calls us, womb mates, right? Your womb mate, the person you are closest to, you're not certain whether your daughter is safe around me. Well, you know, she watched the same films. She had that same context. That was painful to think that, and I had to be understanding of that. I had to have patience and compassion and help her manage her distress. Same with people at work. I had strangers on the street eventually as I was taking some steps forward, wanting to know, are you a man or a woman? I've had people, when I share that I'm a trans person, grab my arm, show me, and try to lead me to the bathroom so that not going to do that, by the way. And it's so many different experiences that I just thought, okay, I got a lot going on. I've got a lot to sort out here, but what's going on for everyone else? And that has been a pretty significant life journey of sorting out, where is all of this coming from? Really, who gives a crap about transgender people if there's such a small percentage of the population? What is that about? And trying to understand the dynamics that are going on. What gets stoked? If I step into a room with, say, a school district administrators compared to a room with preschool teachers, there's a huge difference in what shows up. The preschool teachers are young. Oftentimes they're, you know, they could be in their early 20s or something. They're just loving kids. They're a different generation. The administrators might be my age, plus or minus. They're busy having all sorts of thoughts about this and decisions and those representations. How do we do this? How do we do that? Why should we do this? This feels dangerous. I don't like this. So why does one group have warning bells clanging loudly while another group with even the youngest of kids is like, are you kidding? Well, as a matter of fact, I had one teacher say, "What? I'm sorry, Aiden, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but this is so simplistic, the way you're framing this." I'm like, well, it's not for me and my generation. How do we move from an understanding of gender as only male, only female, only freaks cross over, and definitely no middle ground? Whereas younger generations today are incorporating the conceptual framing of gender identity. They are recognizing the brain is a variable. Well, it's a game changer, really. And I'm busy today still trying to keep up. So I say all that to say, if I can't show up in a room and be compassionate for where others are, then I'm just a big old hypocrite because I was busy doing the same thing in my life about trans people before I had my more come to Jesus moment. Some people don't try to drown their gender identity like I did with lots of alcohol. That was my coping mechanism. And we'll have a stronger and clearer awareness of it along the way. And still, it is a tough journey to decide that you're going to take some steps forward. Now, is that a choice? Well, yeah. It's a choice to try to be an authentic human being and to recognize what's true for oneself. Or you can choose to hide that, deny it, lie about it. And people sometimes do their whole lives. I've met a number of people who talk about, well, I started to do a gender transition when I was in my early 20s, but that was back in the late 70s. And society was not ready for me at all. And I was not ready for that society. And so they stepped back and then began a transition again, much, much later. Even one physician said, yeah, I think my oldest trans person was, I don't know what, she was probably late 70s. She wanted to transition because she was getting towards the end of her life. And she needed to have some time of just being herself. So, trying to decide whether I go to that question. I'm kind of not quite ready, but I am going to get to you, but you
I have a
speak.
much more basic question.
Okay.
When you say trans woman or trans man, is that somebody who transitioned to be a woman or somebody who transitioned to be a man or
Yeah.
is it always that way?
So a trans woman would be somebody who identifies as a woman.
Okay.
That might be the easiest way to remember it. Just think identity is as a woman, but started out male at birth and making their way.
Whenever I hear those terms, that's always my first question.
Yeah, and
We go like, what is the?
forgive me for being so rude as to not even articulate that
No,
clearly.
it's,
I do forget, you know, and my wife reminds me.
it's refreshing to hear for me that you struggle with some of these things sometimes
Yeah.
in your situation, because I know I feel sometimes like I'm behind the 8 ball on a lot of these things and trying to figure that out. So
Yeah.
it like, if you have trouble figuring it out sometimes, then
Well, let me just say too, that being in environments with any number of transgender people and people who identify as non-binary, which, I mean, what is that? If we look at gender as a binary representation, male, female, they're just saying, that doesn't work for me. They're not really saying who they are or what their gender might be. Do they have a third or fourth or fifth term? Are they saying they're a bit of both or neither or whatever? But those are the kind of the two terms that are most common: trans, that more cross-gender identification, and non-binary, which is my gender is my gender. And, you know, if you have a half an hour, I'll spell it out for you. But I saw another hand, did I?
Yeah, I was gonna say, then you throw in pronouns,
I know,
which further complicates it.
right? Right. So, well, let me shift gears and dig into that a little bit. Pronouns, right? We're talking pretty much the smallest words in the English language. And switching from he to she or she to he, conceptually should be pretty easy. But in reality, no way. It is very, very difficult. As a matter of fact, when I was on my own journey, when I was trying to sort out, well, you know, what does this mean for me? What do I do about it? Do I do anything? I found some small support group, maybe half a dozen people, all talking about, you know, possible transitioning and what that represented. And as soon as I walked in there, they started calling me he. And I thought, well, I didn't ask for that, number one. And that sounds really weird. The he, him pronouns were never ones that I used, and I couldn't really figure out, but I just thought, well, all right, they're just doing it. I'm gonna see how that feels. And I couldn't attach myself to he and him pronouns. It's much easier for me today. But I couldn't quite get it. It didn't sound right to me. What does that mean? Does that mean it's wrong? It doesn't sound right, but does that mean it's wrong? And I took he and him as a pronoun, and I sort of expanded the boundaries to scoop myself up a little bit. And what ended up happening is that people that I knew, because I was part of the lesbian community at the time, some of my butchest pals, my motorcycle riding, flat top pals, I started, kind of using he and him pronouns for them. They were not wanting that. But because I had defined it in a way that scooped me, I accidentally scooped them in as well. So I can really relate to the difficulties with respect to pronouns. Did we ever, and did any of you ever learn what pronoun to use for people? By the time you got introduced perhaps to that term pronoun, I don't know, I guess we'd be in elementary school, but we knew pronouns. We didn't need to have it spelled out. We just knew there was an extra name for using he or she for someone. But we knew intuitively because we just absorbed that. And so if we think about our brains and how we develop neural pathways, that pronoun for who fits in he and him is pretty deeply grouped. And same with she and her, which is why I struggled to think, well, how do I do that pronoun? It is not easy to switch. Some parents have described their torture with that. The child they've known their whole lives is demanding a new pronoun, and cranky, we're talking capital letter cranky with their folks or their extended family members or whoever that doesn't get it right within a week. And that parent's busy saying, are you kidding? 17 years I've been using this pronoun for you. You need to chillax. There's a real conundrum, I guess might be one of the best ways. How do you pull yourself out of using a pronoun? I've had a lot of practice, but I'm in doing this work, for over 2 decades. And it is hard for me to switch pronouns for somebody. It's easier than it used to be. I can get into a groove a lot quicker, but I do practice. I have a staff member who identifies as non-binary and they want to use they and them pronouns. And their name is Rachel. I'm like, could you change your name? Please. It will help. Is that Rachel's responsibility to change their name just to help me out a little bit? No. They like their name. They like their name. So I practice. If I have a meeting with Rachel, I do it ahead of time. Rachel, they, them, they, them, they, them. And I get pretty good. I don't slip up hardly at all. But heaven forbid I meet another Rachel, because it might be they and them that goes with that name again. For many, many years, the debate has raged. Well, you can't use they and them for a singular person. Except that our culture moves and changes and evolves, and so does Merriam-Webster and the other arbiters of the English language. And they say, well, yes, we can and will use they and them for a singular person. You can find that. I can't remember what year that was. Somewhere in the 2000s, somewhere. Started being officially adopted for singular use. And so here we are trying to do some new stuff. And you could bet, if you're like, I'm not doing that, then you're not alone. It is hard. That said, I look like this. I move through the world. People say he and him. If I'm on the phone, it's kind of 50-50. Somebody might say ma'am, somebody might say sir. If I'm talking to AT&T, I don't care. Can we, just as long as I'm talking to a real person instead of being on hold. But, if it's somebody I'm going to be meeting up with later, how do I work that in? And I do find a way to work that in somehow, so that I can communicate that if people don't have a visual on me. And sometimes I don't, because you know, people have all different types of voices. Mine happens to be this interesting in-between range with respect to gender. But my presentation, you know, looks pretty male. As a matter of fact, I gotta say, early on in my transition, and once I was kind of more physically presenting male, I had the opportunity to speak at a number of university classes, you know, come tell us your story. We're really interested, whatever. And I was in one particular room and this guy said something like, yeah, well, you know, I saw you come in and I thought, well, who's this short guy? What's he talking to us about? I didn't know I was short. You know, when did that happen? So I guess I talk about coming to peace with life and yeah. So I mean, I really could talk your ears off about this, the journey of moving through the world as a girl and a woman, even though that didn't fit for me. At least it was inside and private. And now trying to move through the world as a man and going, but I'm not sure I have any idea what that means. I just know what kind of man I am. And this man has a very different experience than most men. And then what is that? What happens for everyone else when I share my information? And I share really, really fast because, oh, hi, it's nice to meet you. What's your name? My name's Aiden. Oh, blah, 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 blah. So what do you do for work? Okay, well, first I take a deep breath and then I share what I do for work. And it might not take long for the follow-up question, which is, so how'd you get into that work? Especially on airplanes. Whoever's sitting next to me, I'm like, oh, this will be a long flight, maybe. Because I know I may have to manage a response. And that can have to do with any of those representations. It's coming back from I can't remember, Wisconsin, doing some work with the school district there. And I'm on a flight back to Seattle with a woman who we find out she was at an educators conference. And so we immediately have something in common. And I find out that she is a devout Christian. And I'm thinking, well, shoot, how does this go? Is it just going to get really quiet and we're going to have uncomfortable silence and miss this opportunity? But she was game and I was game. We had a brilliant conversation. And I just felt like I made a friend. You know, I found out that her husband passed away 20 years prior, but she was sharing it and her pain was still really significant. So we created an opportunity where we could really engage with each other as human beings. And she could feel comfortable asking me about things. And she did. Now, I'm not the norm. I'm not the norm as far as trans people are concerned. I talk about it all the time. Not just my experience, but the things that I discover. It's part of my passion. It's part of my work, all of that. So, you know, what I worry about is if she sits next to another trans person someday on a flight and comes at it with that same inquiry, that person may be completely uninterested in that type of discussion. So I have to think about that too. How do I talk to her about this while also sharing that I'm very, very open about this conversation? Whereas other people desire a degree of privacy. You know, what's the difference between privacy and deception? Well, I like to think that there's a difference. I had one young woman who in a university class who wanted really just grilling me big time, asking me these questions. Like, well, suppose you're going on a date with somebody that you just met. When do you tell them? I said, well, I'm probably not going to tell them when we're having our first cup of coffee. Oh, well, you know, I think you should. And, you know, when are you going to tell them? And she was coming at me pretty hard, and I finally just looked at her. And I said, you know what, if we're on our second date, I'll let you know. And whatever, you know, I wasn't. I don't try to be glib about it. I don't think that's the way to go. And if I were having that conversation today, I might discuss it a little bit differently. But it did cause her to back off. And we had a whole lot more conversation. How does someone bring this in? I've spent time talking to folks about distinctions between gender identity and our physical anatomy. And I know because a lot of people ask me about my genital configuration. So I know, you know, and sometimes people do call it the up down. Trying to see the woman in me and wondering about genitalia. That's adult curiosity. The kids aren't doing that. The kids find out I'm transgender and they want to know, how'd you grow that beard? Like, well, this person does some amazing things, you know. Like, in addition to the beard, it's now coming out my ears a little bit. How exciting. Kids want to know, how's your family? How was your family with that? Were your friends supportive? Those are the things that kids say. And actually, they're relatively uninterested in my personal journey. What they want to do is they want to talk about who they are, and not just with respect to gender, because talking with children, we can talk about who we are on the inside versus what we see on the outside. There's a book called Red, a Crayon Story. I love this book. It's a kid's book for little kids. I think I've used it 3rd, 4th graders. And this book is called Red, and there's a crayon on the cover, and the crayon's wrapper says red, but you look at the crayon itself and it's a blue crayon. And so Red's busy trying to be blue, and everyone's expecting, no. The crayon's busy trying to be red. All the other crayons in the story are expecting the crayon to be red, and the crayon is failing miserably at drawing red things. The crayon is quite capable of eventually drawing blueberries and waves and the sky and different blue things. So it's just a completely lovely little story that has nothing to do with gender, except that it's a way that kids can understand a gender identity difference internally versus what's on the wrapper. And so they can readily understand that somebody might have a different gender on the inside than what we see on the outside. And then they take it to another level, and they want to talk about who they are on the inside in relationship to a million things. What kind of food their family eats, their interests. You know, one kid said, well, nobody can tell by looking at me that I'm a gamer. 24/7, I'm a gamer. People can't tell by looking at me. Other kids have said, well, this one 3rd grader, she talked about her mom. When my mom moved from East Africa, people said unkind things to her. They called her dirty, and they called her ugly, and they told her she should go home because of her wrapper, her skin color. And this kid had such deep pain when she was sharing this, because of course her mother is an amazing and beautiful person on the planet. So she understood, she related to that in that way. Those children can get to those places so quickly, those parallel examples, that it really makes it easy to see why these conversations are important. And it's not diving in with kids and having a transgender 101 or 201 course. It's really just saying there's more than what any of us may have understood in the past. And that a person's gender identity is their gender identity. What does that mean? Well, for children, it might mean a name change. It might mean that dang pronoun change. But those kids, they can get to those pronouns really quickly. compared to us with, longer lifetime, decades worth of habit. They can understand that conceptually. So name and pronoun change, maybe a kid's making a presentation change. They might be growing their hair out longer or cutting it shorter, changing the clothes that they wear or not. We just don't know. But the concern is, well, what if they change their mind? What if it's just a phase? Well, guess what? If those kids understand gender identity, then that kid says, well, I'm part girl, but mostly boy. Or now I feel like, I'm more boy on the inside than before when I felt more girl. They can roll with that. The first time is the harder time, but after that, they can roll with it pretty easily, and they are not distressed about some lifetime journey. They're not worrying about whether their classmate is going to undergo genital surgery. They're not worrying about whether that child is going to find love and happiness. They just assume that that kid has just as much opportunity as they do to have those things in their lives. I know that this was quite a bit of time ago, 2006, maybe 2007. I'm in a classroom at a school. We'd done staff training. We chatted with parents. We had a parent learning opportunity, and then classroom by classroom, K through 8. I'm in an 8th grade classroom with these teenagers, and we were talking about gender identity and transgender people and all of that. And my co-presenter posed a question to them. Well, now what if there's a trans kid in the class and they show an interest, they show a romantic interest in you? What are you going to do? And it was kind of quiet, and they're kind of looking around a little bit. And then this young woman puts her hand in the air, and she's kind of, I can't really do it on this, but she's kind of leaning back like this. And she says, well, what I want to know is, are they hot? Because if they're hot, no problem. The rest of all the kids were like, yeah, that's right. She set the tone for how that entire group of students is going to move forward. Meaning we don't have to kill someone because we discover they're transgender. We don't have to have a strong visceral reaction of repulsion. Are they hot is subjective. Who I find hot might not be who someone else finds hot, and so on. We know that reality, and we navigate life. So she put it in a context that said, this doesn't have to be a big deal. I wish I could have recorded that because it was pretty awesome. Yeah. Any other thoughts? And I haven't forgotten your question, by the way, problem person in the corner. Trouble back there.
You forgot Mrs. Doubtfire in your pictures. But my question, that's true. So there was a lot of pain at the end though with the parents and stuff. So question is, obviously you deal with children in the school districts, but also you deal with the parents as well. And you being my age and you getting coming, as you're transitioning through, your parents is probably my age parents, probably Vietnam era parents, and you wanting to express how you felt, your response from your parents, and then the difference between then and now with the children, with the parents, and how do you see the differences and the strength that you got as your whatever happened with your parents?
So my mom, who I think just turned 80, came of age at a time where things were really shifting. She went from Michigan to California. She was really wanting to step into the California scene. She would describe herself as a feminist. She told me, she says, just don't let anybody tell you you can't do something because of your gender. Okay. How's this one, Mom? No, not what I signed up for. So I think she faked it a little bit at first. I don't know that she fully understood what I was downloading to her. But she rolled with it. And I think one of the times that it really hit her was she used to work on the Alaska ferry system. So she'd come down the 2 weeks on, she'd end up in Bellingham. I came to visit, let's go have a meal or something and whatever. And so I show up at the ferry terminal and I ask her coworker, you know, like, hey, my mom, her name's Lynn, can you go let her know I'm here? I'm her kid. And so he goes to tell her and he tells her, your son is here to see you. And that's the first time because the physical changes that I experienced are pretty gradual. So she's busy not seeing.
Yeah.
She's still seeing her kid Bonnie.
Right.
Maybe with few little facial hairs or something, right? So I think that really hit her, and I don't remember exactly when that was. I mean, was that 6 months in, a year in? I'm not sure. So she, but she did her best to roll, and I've asked her even recently because so many parents these days talk about the grief that they experience. They really, it is akin to losing a child to death. Even though they're looking at their kid and saying, my kid's still alive, but it hurts so bad for so many of them. And so one of the parents of our support groups asked me, like, how's my mom? Does that grief lessen? Or does it just always, is it always part of the journey? So I said, I'm pretty sure I know how my mom's going to answer that, but I will go check. And so I asked her, I said, Mom, blah, 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 you know, grief. She goes, yes. Yes, I still feel some. Like, okay, I thought so. And, you know, then I can report back. All the hopes and dreams for her two children, even selecting a name, and then I tell her I'm going to change that name. It's heartbreaking for so many people. Some, especially younger trans people, will say, you've got to remove all the family pictures that have me in it. They're too upsetting for me to see. Get rid of those home movies, whatever. And I tell parents, take them down if you need to. Don't get rid of them. Because I've seen those kids come back around and say, well, where's the video of when I was 5? Well, you little shit, you told me to throw it away. You know, so I tell them, please package it up and save it. You look at it when you can and know that your child will likely come on a journey of integration. But early, they're busy trying to grab a hold of that gender and that they haven't been able to have. My dad is actually my stepfather. He came along later. I think I was a teenager when he entered. And, you know, I met up with him and I was supposed to meet up with him with my daughter for Christmas. We were having a visit. And I showed up without my daughter. I'll tell you why that is in a second. But I showed up without her. And he said, so, you know, what's going on? And I said, well, I have something to tell you. And I shared with them, you know, I believe I'm transgender and going to step into a gender transition and blah, blah, blah. And he just looks at me kind of with this look. He goes, well, I've always wanted a son. Okay. He's not typical. Guaranteed. Guaranteed. So I don't know, what's that about? He and my mom divorced a million years ago. That dude is still in my life talking about how proud he is of me and this and that. And in some respects, it helped me decide that he's my dad, even though, you know, he was just sort of some stranger that might come and go. So he really shifted that for me. And it's actually made us closer. But no, that's not anywhere typical. So I facilitate a group with dads, an online group, dads all over the country. And the majority of them are fathers who have sons that are transitioning to become women. So they're either teenage or adult age, and you are not looking at a more distressed and struggling group of people. In my experience, in all of those support groups, than those fathers who are trying to negotiate what that means to lose their son, or at least have that feeling of losing, to become a trans woman, which, you know, those dads are just as human as me, and perhaps experienced a lot of contempt for trans women. And it's their child. And what does this mean to me as a father, as a man in the world? How am I going to come and tell my coworkers, you know, like, how are you going to come and say, I have a trans daughter, it appears, to everyone in the room? You're going to be thinking about how they're going to react. And who knows, you know, your coworkers may say, or think, I would never allow that. I don't know what's wrong with you, but that would not happen in my family. I'd put my foot down, whatever. And so the reflection on one's parenting, the reflection on one's own gender, the reflection on how any of us order the world is all in turmoil. And they're negotiating that. And I will tell you that I've just not seen anything that's more beautiful than those fathers in the room sharing that stuff. And they're supporting each other, and they're commiserating, and they're saying things that when I'm done, I kind of want to go to the fridge and find a beer while I'm making a stiffer drink, because it's intense. It's intense. So I also get to watch them, group after group after group, move forward. And where they get to is pretty profound and significant, but it's not without a pretty significant journey. So those are a couple of thoughts. And let me go back to the piece about why I had to meet my dad without my kid. I'd been in a relationship with a woman prior to my transition. We decided to have a daughter. She did the birthing. Was not interested in that one. And we eventually split up when my daughter was about 5. So somewhere after that was, you know, I'd seen that show, that talk show, I'm like, oh, gender, I might be transgender, I might need to do something about this, and stepped in. So I talked to my ex about this and said, I don't know where this is going. Maybe I started gender transition, maybe I don't, but I wanted you to know, because of our daughter, and that I want to be able to talk about it with each other so that we can present a consistent message to our daughter about this, if I do. Yeah, she says. A week later, I get a letter from an attorney saying, I can't see my kid without supervised visits. It ended up being a long, probably the most deeply painful part of the whole journey for me, because what ended up happening, again, this is probably 25 years ago, is that, you know, if any of you, if you've ever had a divorce and children in this situation, parenting plans, emotions, you know, the relationship is ending for a reason, and it can get super yes, it did. And meanwhile, I'm busy being the transgender person under the microscope, trying to figure out how do I keep my act together here? Because if I don't, I lose my kid 100%. And so I'm managing all of this, and I had to meet my dad and tell him why my daughter wasn't with us. It did take about a year before I got to see her again. I did not lay eyes on her once for an entire year. It divided our friendship pool. And so I didn't even have anybody that could tell me how my daughter was doing. It was really horrific. And guess what? Having grown up primarily with a single mom and my identical twin sister and my friends being all girls. You know, I didn't have much bandwidth for men. Like, who needs them? My relationships are with women, so I was in the lesbian community. And I went through that, and guess what? Talk about humble pie. You know, I would see, where was I? I was on Basham, and I'd go to pick up my daughter on the ferry, and I saw other dads picking up their kids every other weekend. And I saw this one father with, I can't remember if it was 1 or 2 kids, but one of the kids just pitching a huge fit. And dad looking kind of helpless and such grief on his face. And I just thought, I know that feeling. I know that feeling. And so boys and men turned into human beings for me. It's a lot of humble pie. And I see things in such a different way. So what a huge, huge gift for me. I can sit in the room with those dads and I can relate to what they're feeling. I don't feel that way because my kid is transgender, but it felt like my child died because I did not get to see her. When I got this kid back, she'd been through a lot and she was a different kid. And so I had to reestablish a relationship and build. And at some point, even by the time I was able to come back into her life, I thought, I wonder if it would have been better if I just left. If I just said, okay, fine. Is this harming her, this battle between her mom and myself? My biological father didn't fight to be in my life, and my mom made it really difficult for him. She didn't let him know where we were living. She moved, you know, different things. And just wanted child support. Well, here I was paying child support and not getting to see my kid. And it was really difficult. So what I thought is, well, based on my upbringings, you know what? I want my kid to know that I fought for her. I don't know if I'll get to see her, but I want her to know how darn hard I tried. Anyway, digressing a little bit here, but the point is that I felt and continue to feel like I'm learning a lot about humans. You know, no surprise, big memo, boys and men are human beings too. I got to discover that, and I get to continue to discover that. So, yeah, didn't know I was going there. Yeah. Somebody say something besides me.
How did your daughter handle your journey? You said there was a gap in there, but she was 5 before you got separated. How did she handle going from 2 moms to mom and dad?
So yeah, my daughter was 5 when my ex and I split up. We co-parented pretty reasonably, but my ex kept moving further and further away and made it really difficult for me to have time. And it wasn't until she was about 7 that the gender piece came in for me. Up until that point, I felt like things were going pretty reasonably. But because my amount of time to talk to her about this was just microscopically short, I really have no idea what she was experiencing. It just, all of a sudden, I was gone. And I don't know what they said to her about that, but it was something along the lines of, you know, he's ill, he's gonna go see a doctor about this, you know, I don't know how it was described, but I do feel like it was something like that. And a whole year went by of, you know, not knowing what this little 7, 8-year-old was thinking or feeling, but I know she was struggling. And at some point, the court appointed a child psychologist. There was a guardian ad litem. you know, whatever. And I held off on any transition related steps because I wanted her to see me as she remembered me. And I just felt really strongly about that. It was really, really hard. But I think it was the right choice to wait. And it was hard. You know, it was a year of not spending time together and her imaginings and her own grief and all of that. So all I did was focus on how do I stay connected with her? I just want to make sure that when her and I are together, that we're enjoying each other's time. I decided grades were unimportant. You know, if she wanted to tell me about things or whatever, help with homework, but I didn't ask to see a report card. I didn't say, why'd you get a C in this class, you know, whatever. And, you know, time has gone by and we are really, really close now. And it took some time though, because partly too, as she gets older and I'm only seeing her kind of every other weekend, friends are important, right? So she doesn't want to come spend the weekend with me necessarily. Not a unique story, I imagine. But she's really proud of me now. She's proud of the work that I do. She's said things to me like, you know what, this is my generation's issue. We care about gender. We care about a lot of different things. I had to ask her, I'm like, I don't even know what generation you are. Is it Gen X? Is it millennial? She says, I'm a millennial. I'm like, okay, thanks. Anyway. Yeah, I don't know. It's been a bit of a journey. And I will say that sometimes people have asked me if you knew if you knew back then what you know now, would you go back and make the same decision? And I pretty much always say no, I wouldn't. And I wouldn't because I wouldn't make the choice to have lost my daughter. I did my best. And I'm fortunate as far as trans people are concerned because many of them lose their children, or at least did. I was fortunate, and partly because time has progressed. In Washington State, at the time my daughter was born, they were just beginning same-sex couple adoptions. So I was on her birth certificate, even though I wasn't the birth parent. If I wasn't there, I wouldn't have hung out with her and had Thai food yesterday. But we don't have that window into the future. And even so, you know, that time period of losing her and also really dark, personal, like I don't even know what to do about this gender thing was really painful. I did think about taking my life. Well, you know, when you get to the point of thinking how you might do it, I like the idea of the garage with the hose into the car and I can listen to my music and just go to sleep. I didn't do it, and partly because, you know, my daughter, I need to be there for her if I can at all be there for her. Yeah, it's whatever you think and feel or have thought and felt about people who are transgender. I'm here to tell you, there's not a lot of rewards for it. Oftentimes I hear parents of trans kids or non-binary kids saying, well, you know, it's trendy. It's definitely trendy. And, you know, my kid wasn't talking about this until they started hanging around with that group of 3 or 4 other kids. And I let them know that the parents of those 3 or 4 other kids are busy pointing at your kid as the problem also. But trendy is a strange thing. Trendy means you get some type of rewards for it. And I don't know what those rewards are. It's ridicule, it's bullying at school, messages from society, you know, it's pretty significant. And it doesn't mean though that children don't step in to exploration. If we think about those 2 slides in that short clip of, you know, the male brain, the female brain, and maybe there's some range in between. What about those kids who are, if we were able to look at the areas in the brain that correlate with gender, would we see a lot of pink and blue mixtures? Very possibly. So what does that person do that has a more fluid sense of gender, that really grabs a hold of that term non-binary or gender expansive or whatever the term that they might have? You know, what do they do? What choices do they make? When the paths in life are men and women, it's changing, but it's still pretty dang early in that. And then what about bodies? You know, how do you do that? There's so many times. As a matter of fact, if you want to contemplate how many times that you check a gender box, just pay attention from here forward and see how many times that you check that box. And then ask yourselves, I wonder why this is being asked in this moment. Now, what you brought up about bodies, those are some legitimate questions. Absolutely. Are you signing up for a magazine subscription? Why does anybody need to know that? It's what I do when I step into those schools. If you separate by boys and girls, I'm not going to tell you not to do it, but ask yourselves why. I'm trying to remember if this example was here or not, but I remember talking to a group of educators at one of the schools, and we talked about so many different things, and they said, yeah, but you know what? Graduation. What do we do about that? Cool. What about it? Well, the whole town turns out, and the school colors are red and white, and the gowns that they wear, the graduation gowns we alternate them, red, white, red, white. It's really visually striking, and it's a tradition in our school. Okay, well, what part of that is the tradition? Is it the red, white, or is it red with boys, white with girls? And it was both. Boys wear the red robes and girls wear the white. Okay, well, what's the purpose of that? While it seems a little, you know, stretching it a bit to say, but do you check genitals for that? Do you take a look and make sure that anybody that has a red robe has the right equipment for that robe? Well, of course not. And I'm not sure that anybody would advocate for that. Why are the girls wearing white? You know, there's this whole sort of purity, chastity sort of mindset. I mean, the disparities of those things, you know, if a boy or a man is quite a player, you know, it's like, dude, you got it going on. And a girl, well, she's a slut. You know what? My sister will tell you that's deeply unfair. In our younger days, we were both reasonably and with multiple people sexually active, and it has stigma associated with it, much more for her than it did for me. And partly, I'm in the lesbian community being the stud, you know? And if you think that the lesbian community does not perpetuate stereotypes, think again. I can be really popular in some rooms talking about these things, calling you out. Anyway, that's the next alarm saying, don't forget to let people have lunch. Which we're close to. I think I'll say one more thing after you say what you're going to say.
You brought up that you go into rooms with just fathers and then they grieve. What about the mothers?
They do too, but sometimes moms are busy being the champion. And I'm generalizing because it can be reversed. You know, there's single parents, they get to hold, you know, all sorts of things all at once. But in general, moms will say, oh, I've got to scoop up this kid we've got to support this child. I'm gonna read every book I can find. They'll dig in and they'll be the ones to go find the support groups often. And then they'll talk about things like grief. But they're also high on the list is worrying about their kids' safety. So does that mean that dads are not worrying about it? Of course they are. But their worry might mean, why do this? This is dangerous for you, especially if you're a trans girl, trans woman in the world. It's far more dangerous than somebody that looks like me. I'm white, male, I present in the world. It's like kind of easy to walk around these days compared to years in the past, moving through the world as a woman. As a matter of fact, I walked with my wife down in a neighborhood close to our home, and it was dusk or maybe starting to get dark. She goes, I haven't been outside walking at this time of night, maybe ever. And I realized, like, oh yeah, I used to have to think about that a lot too. So there's on one hand, there's a parent that's busy saying, laser in on the kid. This is hard. What can I do to support this kid? Kind of like if your kid's in soccer and they fall down and scrape their knee, one parent might want to come, oh, you got a little boo-boo, let's kiss it, let's make it better, are you okay? The other parent's like, you know, you're okay. Get out there in the game. Come on, you don't want to miss the rest of the game, do you? Both are valuable prospects. One is, what does this kid need and how does the world respond to the kid, or you know, what might they be missing? So sometimes dads are busy focusing on the external world, and that gets in the way of them getting to a supportive place on the same timeline as the immediacy of a mom. But they get to that place, and then guess who falls apart? Mom falls apart. Mom says, I have such grief, you know, whatever. You know, I think it's human and parental reactions, and, you know, heaven help the parent that's holding all of those.
Is it because the father doesn't want to lose his little boy?
Yeah.
Sort of.
Or little girl.
Yeah.
You know, but I just feel like, again, I'm generalizing, but the distress and the anguish is a lot higher when it's a transgender daughter. Yeah. And like I said, my stepdad, oh, I've always wanted a son, you know, he's a freak. Parents don't react that way. And I've told him to his face. I've been really fortunate. And again, continuing to come back to the schools, even if parents want to be supportive, they think, well, how do I send my kid out the door? How do I send them to school when they'll eat that child alive? Well, they don't have to eat the child alive. There are ways, and I don't know any other way to do it than sit with leadership in a school district, the educators, the parent community, all of them, and we got to wade through this. We've got to talk about these things. What are the concerns that show up? What do you think might happen? Because if you just throw your hands up and say, well, what about the bathroom? And everybody goes, yeah, what about the bathroom? Then you've got an audience that just says, no, this kid doesn't get to use that bathroom. Nobody's played it out. Nobody's played it out. Like, what are you concerned about? So thinking about going back to those graduation robes and talking, like, is it important for you to have boy, girl, boy, girl? Is that what everybody's looking for? And what are you hoping to accomplish? A norm of heterosexual marriage? I mean, it's an interesting discussion, really. Like, what's the foundation there? What about a transgender kid? You know, what if I transitioned at a younger age and I was identifying as a boy and making my way through middle school and high school as a boy? Are they going to make me wear a white gown? I don't know. And what is that communicating? It's certainly what I feel like it would be communicating is a huge, huge spotlight on me as a boy with a white gown, presumption of, oh, he must have female genitalia, so he's got to wear the white gown. I don't know. But what it came down to it when we talked about it is that it was the visual red, white, red, white. Okay, so instead of saying, everybody with a penis, grab a red robe, everybody with a vagina, grab the white one. Instead say, I don't know, we're gonna count off by twos. 1, 2, 1, 2. Twos, go get the red ones, white ones, go get the white. That's one way to do it. We talked about a number of different ways, but that we could maintain that tradition, that visual tradition that was valuable. That's what it boiled down to. We like that. And they were so relieved just to have a very, very simple solution. But because the big transgender thing looms large, it was hard to see the solution. I had another example on it, went away. So anyway, those are the things that these types of discussions bring up. What are our societal norms with respect to gender? What do we expect? Why do we expect that? Are those reasonable expectations? Part of it reasonable? And if so, how do we maintain this part while considering how to be inclusive of all the kids? I've done work with all girls schools. Well, you know, we have transgender girls coming, you know, part of our school. And some of the girls are letting us know, like, no, I'm not a girl, I'm a boy, but they want to stay at the school. You know, really, ultimately, we're okay with that, both of those scenarios. But our tradition is an all-girls school, and we refer to our students as ladies. We're supposed to stop doing that. I remember a teacher saying that. So when somebody shares with me that they have a tradition, that tradition's been around longer than me. So I'm not going to come in